Magic itself is based on sacramental understandings. Now, it's not the same thing as a Christian Eucharist, but magic by definition is using material means for transcendent purposes. That magic itself is already sacramental.
I think that you have to reject Protestantism and the very legalistic forms of Christianity, because they get rid of the mysticism, they get rid of the sacraments, they get rid of the saints, they get rid of any notion of theosis.
We talked about the disenchantment, but as Max Weber, he has a book called The Protestant Ethic in the Spirit of Capitalism, where he identifies Protestantism as a sort of necessary prerequisite for a lot of the activity that we're describing right now, because its break with traditionality and its emphasis on rationality sets it apart and into another sphere. But you see then Protestantism doesn't really compete because of its absence of sacramentology, which was the sacraments is where the transcendent divinity meets the immanent materiality. So then the sacrament, what is a sacrament? Where are the sacraments? That's where the places where those things meet. And so Protestantism kind of disregards sacramentology to the side, where the sacraments are just symbols, which then reinforces the dualism because there's not a point of full blending in between them. So despite whatever criticism one has about the Catholic Church as Orthodox or vice versa, that they both maintain the sacraments and they're to some degree maintain the mysticism, the mystery of Christianity. Magic itself is based on sacramental understandings. Now, it's not the same thing as a Christian Eucharist, but magic by definition is using material means for transcendent purposes. That magic itself is already sacramental. So as we see Protestantism create this rationalistic understanding, and so Max Weber, he argues in his book that because the absence of things like confession, this is where he talks about the spirit of capitalism, is that then people, they can't just go to the priest, confess their sins, and feel cleansed. Therefore, within Protestantism, there's always this sort of burden of guilt. How does one exercise and get rid of that guilt? Well, he argues that they do it through labor. And so labor and the work ethic and my career and my job and making money becomes a way for the Protestant mind to sort of exercise that guilt, because they don't have a sacramental reality to their church and they don't have a place for confession. And so I can't help but associate then Protestantism as really this necessary precursor to allow all this stuff to occur in our society, because think of Orthodoxy and Catholicism. It's coming out of a pagan era where this stuff that we're talking about, it was already there, but somehow it was able to fend itself off a little bit better. Protestantism hasn't been able to. And so it's like Protestantism competes with other rationalistic systems. It competes with natural science. It competes with Marxist theory of economics. Yeah. It doesn't compete with magic. Orthodoxy or Catholicism is competing with these more mystical, magical, ritualistic forms of experience. Protestantism is another idea. It's a concept. It's a thing up here. Again, I think Weber, and you could criticize the degree to this disenchantment, because he theorized that maybe religion was going to go away, or maybe it wasn't. So clearly religion doesn't go away. Clearly the yearning for the mystical hasn't gone away, but the disenchantment, I think, absolutely, he felt that this capitalism, this rationalizing, was going to cause people to be alienated, which I definitely agree with. He said through that alienation, then people are going to try to find meaning through personal means. That's the individual religion. That's the focus on my truth, my experience. Yes. And so through that alienation, then I'm reclaiming the world. I'm re-enchanting the world through my experience, i.e. drug use, i.e. sexual promiscuity, i.e. magic. How much do you think Protestantism has aided in the development of really the growth of occult feminism or occultic ideology? In my opinion, I think Protestantism was a necessary prerequisite for it to become normalized to such a degree.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I know you're a Midwesterner, so am I.
Yep.
I grew up in a rural Midwestern county that is all Dutch Reformed Protestant. There's practically nothing else there. I knew of Catholicism. I just knew it was terrible and evil and horrible. And everything else was this Dutch Reformed Protestantism. And the culture where I grew up is like very, very clean, very, very pious. I have a cookbook from my great grandma where it's like your first cookbook as a wife, and it says that you should make food that is palatable enough to eat, but not tempting enough that you might overindulge. And it's like, my grandma is still with us. She's turning 96 on April 1st.
God bless her. Many years to her.
And she's wonderful. I mean, she's a wonderful, wonderful lady, but she's up at 5 a.m. She puts her shoes on. She has her house clean. And, you know, all of my dad's family was business owners. They were in government. They were in church consistory. And it was like, you worked and you didn't ever talk about money. You would like do things that would kind of display that you had money, but only to a certain extent. You didn't want to be flashy. There was like so many rules. And it was very much like, I remember my dad saying that we couldn't swim on Sundays because that was against the rules, but you could dangle your feet in the pool. And my dad, he went through like a phase where he just totally rebelled against all that. He was like, what? Because it was so legalistic. It was so rational and so legalistic. It was like purely a legal system of like, follow the rules and do what you're supposed to do. And, you know, if anybody sees you doing something against the rules, then you're in trouble, but you don't have confession. You don't do any of that. It's just like, you have to, so that I know the culture you're talking about, and I know how Protestantism can be like that. And I think that what we saw with the spiritualist revival in the late 1800s was, historians tend to agree that it was a backlash against the puritanical form of Protestantism, where it was like people know, we all know that there is something more than just material reality. Most of us know that.
Right.
There are some who like really stick to that and really want to believe that it's just the material. But I don't think it's any coincidence that a lot of people who come to Orthodoxy were in the occult at some point.
Right. Myself included.
Right. And my husband didn't really get into it, but he studied it a lot. There was some Freemasons that kind of tried to recruit him for a while. So he like looked into it and started studying some stuff. He was like, whoa. But he knew that stuff was real because he was like, it works. I don't know how it works, but that stuff works.
Right.
You know, like Brother Augustine will talk about how, that stuff works.
Yeah,
if you know that magic, if you know there is something to the metaphysical, I think that you have to reject Protestantism and the like very legalistic forms of Christianity, because they do get rid of the mysticism. They get rid of the sacraments. They get rid of the saints. They get rid of any notion of theosis. Like when I try to talk to Protestants in my area about what theosis is, they think it's the worst heresy they've ever heard. You can't be like God. You're a filthy rag. You're horrible. Your desires are terrible, and everything about you is horrible and filthy and awful. So I think there was a big backlash against that during the spiritualist movement. We see it come back again in the Roaring 20s. The Roaring 20s was another big, we got the 19th Amendment. We had the Flapper Girls. There was this age of decadence before the economic crash in the 30s. And that's when Sanger and Planned Parenthood and birth control and all that came about, because it was really the first wave of women's sexual liberation. We think of that being the 60s. But we had it in the 20s as well. And that's why they needed things like diaphragms and birth control pills and Planned Parenthood.
Yeah.
And it became this, like, everything in the West is this dialectical tension. And it's like, we don't know any other way to think about things.
Right.
We don't have any other way to conceptualize. So it was this, even within feminism, you had like the really ultra pious women who didn't want alcohol or anything like that, who were feminists. And then you had the big sexual liberation women who wanted free love. And that continues to this day, although now piety is all but lost. Since we've had the internet and things like that, it just doesn't exist. And I think, if we hadn't had Protestantism, people would still believe in things like Orthodoxy. Catholicism might be more influential, because they've even really neutered Roman Catholic churches to the point that they're meaningless. And so people go looking for something else. And this is something you'll see a lot too in women who get into witchcraft, younger women. It's a huge draw for younger women. And that's one of the reasons I wrote this book, because I see these girls in their early 20s, late teens, and they'll say, I came from a fundamentalist Baptist background, or I came from this like really strict pious background, and I felt oppressed. I felt repressed. Sometimes there's even abuse that happens in those situations. And so they go looking elsewhere. And what the occult, and especially like Dianic Wicca, you were talking about the goddess Diana. Dianic Wicca is the largest sect that's female only. Yep. And so women who feel that, women who come from those backgrounds, they're really attracted to it because it tells you you can have, do you feel helpless? Do you feel like a victim? You can have power.
Right.
Come to us and we will show you how to have power through your sexuality. We'll show you how to reclaim your true womanhood and your true fertility and things like that. But again, do we see witches having 10 kids? No, we don't.